Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. Hello, this is Tzaphan or ADNI, also known as Michael, and this is the first ever podcast. So, this episode, number one, basically what we're going to do is just get to know each other. So, I guess the first thing we should talk about is, what is this podcast? Or what do I hope that it's going to become? Well, I can answer it with this anecdote. When I first started my journey in occultism in general, I remember the first obstacle I had to face was just the feeling of being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of material that you have to study, and also just how in-depth, how complicated, and how fragmented it all was. And on top of that, I was frustrated with the people that were distributing this content, how everything was so secretive. It's almost as if trying to ask like a very, very overly spiritual person a direct question, they'll usually reply with a convoluted, beat 'em around the bush kind of answer. And that's how I felt any questions that I had about certain occult topics were. Um, I studied occultism to escape the trappings of religion or organized religion, and I found the same demon that haunted that. Well, so that really frustrated me, but luckily there are people out there who care. And I did find a few authors and a few people on the internet throughout my journey that laid the secrets out, or at least distributed them in a way that made it more easily accessible and easy to understand. Um, and I was eternally grateful. So I eventually got to a point in my journey that, uh, you know, I'm still realizing that there's a little bit of a deficit out there, a need for just people to speak honestly about this whole thing, about, studying consciousness, about occultism, about spirituality, um, just about so many things that just aren't out in the open, that are coming out in the open. I just see maybe an opportunity to try and help in a way that I feel like maybe I can be effective. But we will see. So, first off, I think we'll just go ahead and talk about me. This is a little awkward. I'm normally not the kind of person that likes to talk about themselves lengthily, although I'm sure I find myself doing so in conversations. So hopefully this will come a little easy. But, so, in this podcast, I would just like to talk about just occult topics in general. We'll be speaking of Thelema, Aleister Crowley. We'll be speaking of, say, like Eliphas Levi, the Golden Dawn, different magical traditions, different spiritual traditions, um, spiritual practices, yogic practices. We'll also talk about humanitarian issues, things that affect us as a human species. We'll also talk about space, travel, all kinds of different things. Things that basically have to do with the evolution of consciousness of man. I guess it's probably the best way to put it. We're going to be another one of those spiritual woohoo channels. But underlying all that is hopefully a little bit of rationalism and illuminism. So, the format, I would like to just implement probably two things. One, just to keep things interesting, is we'll do a podcast, tarot reading. So we'll maybe start or end with a specific card or layout, and me, or if we have any guests, we'll give a interpretation of the card based off of even their particular spiritual practices, if any, and then my own. I would also like to do a reading, just like a Bible study, of the Book of the Law. But of course, I will not be giving any specific content of what I think the book is saying. If I do give any commentary to this content, it would be directly from Aleister Crowley's commentary or any official commentary published by the OTO. And just to be straight regarding the OTO, I am not claiming any specific membership or title or degree within the OTO. I myself do hold certain degrees in certain occult organizations, but I don't feel like that's necessarily important. I think what's more important in this day and age is the individual discovering their path, their true will, in any way necessary. For some people, that involves joining an organized occult group and going through their systematic initiation. It's, I believe, probably the most effective way, in my opinion, but everyone is different. So if you're one of those people that does not do well in a group or feels that their spiritual path is more solitary, that's awesome. That's exactly what the internet is here for. It's exactly what I'm trying to do. Provide a way for people who don't have a way to join these organizations or connect with these people, or just may not want to or wish to for whatever reason, can still have access to content, whether it be readily available, but at least have commentary on that content to help them get a perspective or an idea, a footing, a foundation in this turbulent world. So I want to do readings from the Book of the Law. So I guess we could just start with that. Once you do the reading, then I'll go ahead and move on to talking about myself. We'll talk about my spiritual journey up to this point, and then maybe give us some light on to why we're doing this. So, whenever I'm going to be doing this, I will be referring probably the most to this book. So, if you want to follow along with the podcast, always have Aleister Crowley's Magic, Theory, and Practice. Now, you can get this book on the internet. I got this copy from Amazon for like $80 or something like that. It's a little pricey, but it is fantastic. It's put together absolutely wonderfully. It's published by Wiser Publishing. It's an excellent book. I'm not sponsored by them in any way, obviously. I just give props to this edition. But before I had this physical copy, because I am not a rich man, I just downloaded it on Kindle. There's like a $1 version, $2 version, and I would just read Liber Abba, Book 4. I would just read that. And then I had a copy of 777 I ordered that was really beat up from a library sale. I swear this thing is probably one of the first copies. It's so old. That's another book you might want to have available. This has a kind of condensed version of 777 in it. But if you have this book, you'll be able to check what I say and see if I'm correct, because, like I said, I am not an expert in this, and I am not claiming any high degree or low degree of anything. So I can be wrong. In fact, I will probably be wrong, which is awesome, because that just reveals where I can improve. But yeah, we're going to read from this. If you flip to page 305, this is the one thing I didn't like about going to church and in the Bible. When you're a kid, you don't have all the books memorized and where they are, no matter how many times you go to Bible school. Well, some of the kids did. But they would say, turn to Ezekiel 3, verse 2. And as a kid, you're like, I don't know where the heck that book is. So you'd be flim-flimming looking for the adults. You get someone else to help you. And you're like, why can't they just tell me what page to go to? I can count. I can find out what page. Yeah, but this is awesome. If you have this copy in addition to the book, you will be able to follow me page by page. So, we're just going to start right at the beginning. And I think what we're going to do is we'll stick by the rule of the pentagram. And we'll do 5 verses a podcast. So, we're going to be starting with the first book of the Book of the Law. And this book is attributed to Nuit, the goddess of the starry night. Okay, it starts. Hod, the manifestation of Nuit, the unveiling of the company of heaven. Every man and every woman is a star. Every number is infinite. There is no difference. Help me, O warrior lord of Thebes, in my unveiling before the children of men. That's a wonderful word. I think we'll save the tarot reading for a little later. Even I need a break for myself sometimes. Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and just start. So, we'll start at the beginning. I was born. Well, I was born a while ago. You could say I am 29 years old. My zodiacal sign is Aries. So you can just, I guess, figure it out from there. As far as do I think I am an Aries? I don't know. The classifications that come under my natal chart do kind of have a lot of very keen characteristics that do match up, but then there are some that I don't think do. That's kind of the cool thing about astrology is your brain has a tendency to pick out things and make matches to kind of inflate your ego, or your ego kind of likes the effects of some aspects or ways of reading astrology. So you have to be very cautious when delving into that field. But yeah, I would say definitely I am an Aries in the sense, in a general sense, I guess. So yeah, I was born. I remember the most interesting thing, I think, related to my early childhood that I think I can comment on is a similarity that I have with an author, which is what really kind of propelled me towards thelema. Not in particular, but it really helped in the whole scheme of things, kind of in that whole syncretic way things work out, as a lot of you may have experienced. But the author Lon Milo Duquette, who, if you don't know who I'm speaking of, I highly recommend go on Amazon or any book publishing. I can't specifically remember what publisher he's with. I can't remember if it was Penguin. Might have been Wiser. I don't know. Sorry, Lon. He's fantastic for just easy to understand occultism. I mean, the best. It's awesome. But he writes in like all of his biographies about basically when he was a child, he was very aware, or as an infant, he was basically instantly conscious of his surroundings. Like he had this conscious awareness of being a baby and being helpless and being like, why can't these dumb adults understand me? I remember being not a baby in a sense, although I do have, of course, infant memories, but they were of just people's faces over me. But I remember being a small child and having this odd running, not running commentary, but this odd conscious commentary of my own life and of just everything that was going on. Like, I guess the best way to explain it is, say, about being 3 years old and understanding how we talk. I would understand how when I would speak, I wasn't speaking in the same manner that adults spoke in. That my grammar wasn't right, inflection wasn't correct, just the general way that I acted wasn't the same. But the awareness of this talked, or I guess communicated in a way that was more on par of, say, the intelligence of an adult, as a distinct awareness. Now, as I grew older, that kind of, in a sense, merged into one singular consciousness of awareness. I would say probably around age 9, somewhere around there, 8 or 9. I think probably due to trauma. I laugh now because you learn to, I guess, get over these things and transform the experiences. But um, things happen, and you change awareness and you grow. Um, but I remember distinctly relating that conscious experience of seeing myself as something very normal to me and something I assumed other people had, um, and almost in a sense as a child feeling it as being almost something that was spiritual. I didn't understand what spiritual was, but I think the way I understood it then was there was where we are, like on Earth, or my conception of Earth at that time was a house, a couple streets, and like a HEB supermarket store. If you don't know, HEB is a supermarket in Texas. It is the best dang supermarket ever. Go Texas. But I remember being just consciously aware of just these things, and I remember there being everything that was outside of that existence. I remember being aware of an existence outside of everything that I was already consciously aware as a child, and that those things being very spiritual. And I remember, of course, my immediate family came from there, but I remember feeling like there was other people and other things that came from even farther away that where I came from. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's like, hey, I'm here, but I used to be somewhere else. Like, I guess you could say, like, remembering in a sense that I was someone else before I was this current person. Um, but like myself, it's weird. um, so that was kind of like the first, I don't know, kind of weird thing that I feel like revealed to me that it was a certain path to my life. Um, Around 12 or 13, my grandparents, who well, were and are, one's gone, one's still here, fantastic people, great people, very religious people, Church of Christ. Um, Church of Christ is a very fundamental Christian denomination. Well, they are non-denominational, but they are a denomination. They're very fundamental in the sense that they take a lot of the Bible very literally, and they're very minimalistic in their worship practices. Like they don't use instruments in church, even though I've heard a rumor that here recently they're thinking of introducing like piano or guitar or something to try and keep up with the times. It's interesting how your faith is strong until the money starts to go away. Um, but on a side note, um, yeah, that's where they were, but they were fantastic people despite that. Um, but I started going to church, and that was my first really in-depth experience into religion. Now, I grew up. My mother's side of the family is Hispanic, um, and this isn't like a racial stereotype, but here it kind of is. We were Catholic. Um, and I was raised as a non-practicing Catholic, essentially. Like on holidays, we would go, or with when we were family, and my aunts and my uncles would berate me and tell me that my beliefs would have to fall in line with this certain way of belief. So I guess as from an early child, I was exposed to Christianity in a somewhat not intense way, but when it was presented, sometimes it was fairly intense. Um, but I remember thinking like, yeah, cool. I can believe this in some sense. There's a God, and he's loving, and he has all these rules and stuff. I guess I could get it. Adults are loving, and they have a bunch of rules. So, sure, I guess that's a thing. Um, but it wasn't until 12, 13 that during the summers when I would go visit my grandparents and stay, I would go to church with them every Sunday, and just kind of hearing the Bible studies and going to the Sunday schools and workshops and things of the sort. I just remember kind of slowly being introduced to that whole concept of belief. I remember being aware that there was other faiths, but not at that particular time, not studying them too deeply. I remember still, though, in a weird sense, being drawn to like Hinduism and Buddhism as a kid because of the Asian um, look and influence, and I'm being obsessed with like martial arts movies. Um, it's just weird as a kid how you correlate like very odd things to other things, and you kind of culturally amalgam cultures you don't understand. But I remember being utterly fascinated, like just completely fascinated, like having to hide it from my family because of all that, which is a little weird. They would allow me to have as much alien stuff. I remember being completely obsessed with aliens as a kid, like having every alien poster, everything I could. Um, until a certain point, I just completely abandoned it. But they let me have all of that, and they would buy me like Spawn toys, like the toys from the Spawn franchise, at like a very early age, which are somewhat demonic. But I wasn't really allowed to discuss or talk about foreign religions. um, but I think that's because like for the most part, my family are level-headed people, good people, but are still indoctrinated in a way of belief that doesn't really correspond to that natural goodness they have in their hearts. But to continue, it wasn't until about 15, 16 when I was introduced to occultism in general. I had my stepsister, um, in her, I think, senior year of high school, she got into witchcraft. She bought several of Gerald Gardner's books. She also bought some other random books that after a few months, I remember being exposed to her having friends over and they would talk about it and they would do little rituals and stuff like that for a short period of time. I remember listening outside of her door, which was across from my room, and just wondering, like being completely amazed of like this other way of like believing things. And like up until that point, I knew there was other faiths, but like it wasn't part of my everyday reality. So in a sense, it was not real. But here in my house, it was becoming real. Plus, she was, she is half Thai. So a lot of that Asian culture and Asian influence of her religion, she slowly started bringing over as she moved in or she came over more because she was my stepsister. So she wasn't there all the time. So I remember slowly being introduced to these new things spiritually and then just being completely enamored with it. And I remember after a little while, she moved out and she left all that stuff there. And I think she stopped doing it. She abandoned it. But I remember searching through her boxes and finding the books. And I remember my heart beating so hard as I'm like thinking, I'm like, my hands shaking. Like, I had found something. Something just, I could feel like my whole body was just electrified. I remember it to this day. It was like my first physically religious experience. I remember like all throughout my childhood having these like weird religious thoughts and thinking these odd things and feeling a little bit like when you read the Bible story of Jesus going to the temple at age 12 and like giving lessons at the temple and they're like, whoa, what are you doing here, Jesus? And he's like, just dropping some knowledge, bros. I remember being a kid and being like that. Not like that, not like Jesus, but like kind of feeling like I want to have the real conversations as a kid. Like, tell me the real story. Don't tell me the kid story. Don't give me the kids' Bible books. I want the real thing. Just being so interested in that. And I remember holding these occult books and just, oh my God. And I read them really quick. I remember staying up at night and reading them and shaking and waking up really early in the morning. It was like a secret occult practice to me. And for those couple months that I only had those books, I must have read them, I don't know how many times. Mastered the books. I mean, I from cover to cover numerous times. And I also have to remember that I grew up fairly isolated in the country. Now, of course, I went to school, had friends and everything like that, and every now and then I would go hang out with friends. But for the most part, 90% of the time, it was me by myself in the country having to find out ways of entertaining myself. So apart from just wandering into the woods, I would read a lot. So I devoured those books. And I remember for some odd reason I convinced my mom to take me to Half Price Books at this time and let me buy whatever I want. And that's when it all started. Um, like I said, it's very weird. I had these religious parents, religious um, family, grandparents, and like literally at around 15, I think they just kind of gave up on like trying to convince me of it all because I mean, I don't want to say on a par where they couldn't convince me anymore, but when you're a teenager, you can't convince a teen of anything. They're just hard-headed. So at that point, they were like, let him find out for himself then. So I remember just going, buying Agrippa's 4 books of occult philosophy, bought the Necronomicon, the Satanic Bible. I bought an early version of Aleister Crowley's Magic Theory and Practice. Um, oh man, everything I could get. I got all these books on like Wicca, Druidism, um, just alchemy. I bought my first tarot deck, and this is all within like a 1 year span of being in high school. I bought dozens of these books, and that's all I would do. From I would wake up around 4 o'clock in the morning, just start pounding down these books. I would get on my bus, which was like an hour bus ride to school, and I would just read more books. I would get to school, finish my schoolwork, read more books. It was an obsession, an absolute and utter obsession. Um, I would take the Necronomicon before I realized that the thing wasn't real, that it was written by like publishers or something like that. Either way, I would take it into the woods and like read the book and practice the magic in the book. Yeah, 16-year-old kid in the woods by himself practicing the Necronomicon. It was awesome. Excuse me, reposition myself. And but that was my life. That's what I did to entertain myself beyond like playing video games and writing and drawing. As you can see here, these are my artwork. These are my 4 seals of the apocalypse. We'll explain those at some other point. But it's my original artwork, which hopefully will integrate that into all of this because that's a huge facet of who I am, is my art. This isn't to sell any art because none of you can buy it. But I feel like it's a part of people's spiritual path is revealing things about themselves and pursuing them. So, age 16, I got onto all this. Then I started practicing the magic, mainly in the form of witchcraft, Wicca, because it was the most easily understood at that time for me. Um, Tried a little bit of, say, like Goetia, but it kind of freaked me out a little bit because of that overlooming cloud of Christian faith that taught me that demons were evil, and if you had anything to do with them, they would take over your life and make you like a sex-crazed drug addict. Um, yeah. Um, so that kind of went on for a while until late age 17, when home life wasn't going too good. So I realized I had to make a change. So that summer when I left to stay with my grandparents, I just didn't come back. I just had it. And I started going to a new school, and it was a weird change in my life, a really big shift. And I remember just deciding to just take a spiritual path. And I got saved. Jesus touched my heart, and I got saved. And okay, I know I'm going to joke around a lot about this, but I guess when I speak about this time in my life, in particular, it was real. I mean, the love that I felt from God, um, everything, the just the wonderful things that you hear about Christianity, the good things that it has in it, I experienced and I fell in love with it, and it was awesome. Um, I got baptized in the Church of Christ, and I was all in. Like I went to school. I was going to a new school, but I devoted a lot of my time to going to the church every time I could, learning as much as I could, Bible studies, things like that. And I remember still not connecting so well with the other people, with the faith, because I remember, like, when you first join a religion, especially when you're young, you have this zeal, this overwhelming amount of spiritual zeal towards it, and you have to be really careful about how you expend that energy and how you come off to people. And I feel like I was a little intense as a kid because I was intelligent as a well, I like to think I'm intelligent now, but as a young adult, I was fairly mature for my age. I was way more friends with my teachers than I was with a lot of kids, and the kids I was friends with were either outcasts who I related with because I didn't feel like I fit in with a lot of normal people, or they were like the nerds who were also friends with the teachers. So I always felt like I was more intellectual than a lot of people. So I related to adults more. And I would challenge adults on their spiritual beliefs. And a lot of people don't like being cornered by a young adult and question that intensely. And I understood that, but I also felt like, hey man, this is your soul. Maybe you should really take it seriously. This is where your eternity. So uh, I just remember not connecting there and having like these like mini breakdowns in the churches sometimes, and like the pastor would have to be like, "So what's going on?" And I'm like, "Dude, like, do you really believe what you're teaching? Like, you believe like Jesus is gonna come at any time? If you've sinned at any time, like say you just got done sinning, and Jesus comes, you're going to hell." I'm like, how can we not just be doing everything we can? I'm like, why aren't we breaking down walls? Why isn't the Catholic Church, why aren't we taking them over and taking all their money and giving it to the poor because they ain't doing nothing with it? I was like, what are we doing? And I remember the pastor basically being like, that's not the way things go. You have to take a tempered approach. You have to remember that, we have to live in this world. We're in the world, but not of the world. And, just giving you all those explanations. And I remember understanding that as a kid, but I'm like, yeah, but bro, Jesus is coming. and and just beyond that, having this weird spiritual sense of things, like telling the pastor, like, you know, when you have these hurt people that are coming up on stage, they have these like heavy auras, these like heavy shadows on them. And the pastor's like, are you talking about demons? We're Church of Christ. We don't believe in demons. When Jesus came, he subjugated the devil and all his cohorts, and they don't exist anymore. So already I started sounding crazy. And then I tell him, like, hey, really happy people, spiritual people, pure people, they have these like very clean, like air around them, like clean light around them. And he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, son. So that was really the first time I was like, wow, um, either these people aren't really getting it or I'm crazy. Turns out that I'm crazy. Um, I never remember that whole thing, like just not stopping, like continually feeling that way, regardless of like what spiritual people I talked to. And every now and then you would encounter people that would kind of think the same way, and they were very like they were hermits basically within the faith. They wouldn't communicate with people, and you'd understand why basically they were in the church, but like they didn't have a lot of friends in the church because they really believed it and they were just as fed up. Um, Now, the reason why I'm not a Christian anymore is for the reasons I just explained. There was a big disconnect that I had with a lot of the spirituality. I started getting more and more into like more charismatic faiths. I got more into mystic Catholicism, Gnosticism, the charismatic movement, which has to do with like Pentecostalism in a sense. Um, Trying to find that deep spiritual connection, trying to find God in a sense, or understanding that God was a tangible thing that I could reach in this lifetime, but trying to actively pursue a way to find that feeling, to find that spiritual high in a sense. So I left the church mainly because of the people. I really got frustrated with the hypocrisy. I know this is probably like the same thing everyone talks about. I just realized that like the faith is one thing, but then the way people practice it is completely different. Um, but I got very disillusioned with the beliefs and their ability to be practically implemented in real life and practically implemented by real human beings. Um, so, if this is a fairy tale world with fairy tale people, it would work. But this is the real world, and that book's not real, so it doesn't work for the most part. And when it does work, it's because it's that person that's making it work. Not the book, not the belief. It's that person. And that's what I really came to understand. And I understand, like, seeing, I guess you want to say, through spiritual eyes a lot of times, you would see past the bullshit of people's beliefs and you would say, no, you healed yourself. You became healed because you let go of whatever burden you had that was attached to whatever you were experiencing, this pain. And they're like, no, Jesus did it. And I'm like, he wouldn't have been able to do it if you didn't forgive yourself or give up that spiritual burden in there. Which I get it. You need a way to interpret what's happening to you. But I knew very early on, almost instantly, that this was just a way of interpreting things that you couldn't understand otherwise. It was Christianity for me at that time was a way of fitting in these things that were happening into an understandable way. Once my understanding surpassed that, in a sense, for myself, I felt like it was time to move on. So I did. The weird thing is I stayed in the church. I moved on intellectually, even spiritually, but I stayed in the church because why not? Crowley spoke a little bit about this when he talked about, you're born into a certain environment. Your pentacle, manifests in a very particular environment. Your ability to fulfill your will is correlated to your environment and how much power you can exert over your immediate environment, which is why he asserted that you should travel. You should find somewhere that you're wanted, where your energies will be accepted. So, living in America, living in Texas, living in a heavy Hispanic community, being a good Christian makes a lot of sense. You can do a lot of good, and that's all I wanted to do, was become spiritually enlightened and help others and do good. Christianity was a really good way to do that. So I accepted that as my external faith, even though internally I didn't entirely believe it, but it would work. Like, I would pray to Jesus and receive the spiritual light would come to me as Jesus. It would manifest how I desired. And if I believed hard enough and disciplined myself enough and brainwashed myself enough, I would honestly believe the faith. Even if I knew beyond all that there was something beyond. I didn't understand what was beyond that, so I accepted this structure. So I stayed in the church up until around, like I said, I'm 29. I stayed in the church up until I was around 24 or 25. So you can kind of see how deep I went. The experience overall is excellent. I met so many just wonderful, wonderful people. I also met some of the most evil shit people you'll ever imagine. And that terrifies me. That those people are around children. It's a really big problem I have with organized religion, is they allow psychopaths alone with children. It's horrible. Horrible. And parents, because of the facade of religion, just trust strangers with their most prized possessions. It's insane. But whatever. People do it with the school system too. People willingly subjugate their wills to others for the feeling of security. I get it. Whatever. But I stayed in the church, but I still studied. Not so much magic, but I studied other religions. Buddhism, Hinduism. A really big one was I still studied like the Druidic or Celtic religion. Even though I'm Hispanic, I'm also of Anglo-European descent. So I wanted to kind of explore that spiritual background. I studied, I guess you could say a little bit more of witchcraft in a sense, or magic in a sense. I studied voodoo, just other weird, odd things as they interest me. Or I guess you could say whatever I could study hidden, kind of alone. Whatever kind of book didn't seem to be a magic book, but I could study it in secret, I would. The internet was a haven for me because I could just go on the internet, find these books, or find articles, or um, I could find occult documents and read them. And then when I was done, they were just close the browser. It was awesome. So I did that for years, from basically age like 18 to 25. That's what I would do. And I was open with people what my past was, but I wouldn't expose to them that I was still essentially that thing. People, they didn't understand. Anytime I would try to explain to people where I was coming from, it would, one, completely discredit me to them, and secondly, they would instantly think I am insane. um, which is okay. I understand in the long run how there had to be that constant resistance, because that's not where I was supposed to rest forever. So, after a series of life changes, um, left the church and Christianity in general, and had a period, very tumultuous period, I would say. I went through my own basic version of hell on earth, um, just because of me. I mean, it happens. We do things to ourselves. Life happens. You don't make the right decisions, you don't learn. But you eventually learn, and you try and pick yourself back up and recreate yourself in a better version. And that's exactly what I did. I decided to just stop resisting myself and just become, and, well, become what I really believed I was, or become what I thought I could be, and what I wish I could be, and what I truly am. I'm still on that journey, but it's been excellent so far. Um, so around this time, about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I hit hard. um, I got involved in my first occult organization. Um, just started buying books again, studying, practicing was the main thing. Getting into yoga, meditation, and then of course the practice of ceremonial magic. Yeah, so that's basically where we are now. Is for myself, over a lifelong journey of spiritual luminism, I come here wanting to guide and help others in their path, because I kind of wish growing up I had a way of finding people, or at least listening, and at least not feeling so alone in the world. Um, that's probably the best thing, is just not feeling alone. So, I feel we're about 40-something minutes into this. I didn't want to make these super long podcasts, so we're going to move on to our tarot reading of the day and get our own personal interpretation. Now, a lot of people have specific rituals when it comes to tarot, like how many times they shuffle the deck. They might have specific invocations that they'll incite before drawing a card. People will have specific layouts they'll use. I like to be a little bit more intuitive with it, so I'll give my invocation kind of on the spot, and then the layout, if I feel I'm receiving a certain pattern for a layout, I'll use that. If not, I'll just draw a single card. I think these, just for the sake of time, we'll just do single cards. So, I'm just going to move this away. Call upon the depart thy wisdom upon this universe of cards. Give us a message. Allow us wisdom into the secrets of the unknown. Okay. So, we got the Ten of Wands. Oppression. Let's see if I can get... Where's the camera? There it is. Wands, as you may know, is the suit of fire. It's the suit of will. It's also, in Kabbalah, it represents the world of Atziluth, the archetypal world, the God realm. This is the realm where the God names basically originate from. Now, of course, we have a God named Messiah, and so there's the ways of controlling physical reality through God names. But in Atziluth, these are the pure archetypal forms of those Sephiroth, or gods. So here we're dealing with 10, which is Malkuth, so the most earthly part of Atziluth. So essentially the earth of Atziluth. So we're dealing with the most spiritual version of our kingdom. So the spiritual manifestation of our will in our kingdom. So how we act, how we will, and how we have our being within the spiritual confines of our reality. So the astrological correspondence to this card, we have Saturn in Sagittarius. So we know Saturn is Binah, that is the throne of wisdom. She governs time. She is the giver of form. So Saturn rests above the abyss on the tree of life. So she is supernal. She is beyond our current understanding. Now, we get a understanding of Saturn from below the abyss, but generally that's not very beneficent. It's a maleficent sign, which is why Saturn is generally called the Great Malefic. With Mars, the sphere below Binah, Saturn, being the lesser malefic, or the lesser, I guess you could say, like evil. But the greater evil, mainly because, think of it this way, time destroys all things, kills all things. And also, in a side note, the constant progression of time and an endless cycle and incarnation is a maddening form of awareness, in a sense that below the abyss, it's madness. Above the abyss, its eternity becomes something different. So we're dealing with that force acting in Asaya. So we learned that Earth is, in a sense, ruled by Saturn. The giver of form gives form, and that eventually becomes an actual thing, a formed object. In this sense, Saturn, being the Great Mother, manifests the daughter, gives birth to the sun and the daughter, so the sun and the earth. She loses her force and is revealed in our realm as the moon or as the reflection of the sun, blah, blah, blah. Whatever spiritual tradition you want to interpret it, just around those lines, I guess. So we're dealing with that force in Sagittarius. Sagittarius on the Tree of Life links Yesod to Tefera, so links the moon to the sun. So we're dealing with will in relation to our lunar conception of things, in Atziluth to our solar conception of things in Atziluth. This is all really complicated really quick. I apologize, guys. I guess I'm just trying to find an interpretation, scrounging through all the stupid correspondence in my head. So we'll just go ahead and say, what is this card? How do I interpret it? Just coming at me. I view the uplifting of my life circumstance. So this whole time we've been talking about things that have happened in my life, things that have done to me, and things that I have done. So these are applications of will. So my spiritual progression in life has been a constant application of a specific desire or specific will that I've had since childhood. It has formed and created my very reality. So in imposing in Atziluth, in will, in fire, imposing that constant fire throughout my life to the giver of form, Binah, so feeding the fire of Hokmah into Binah to give form into my spiritual reality as it is now, it was a form of oppression. I oppressed the very spiritual desire, I don't know, something like that. Now, I guess you could say that giver of form manifested in my current perspective of things in Yesod, in my lunar internal way of viewing things, but then being the card that translates the energy of Yesod up to Tifreth, to the sun, to a more illuminated way. I can interpret this card as a way of showing that this is perhaps a good direction in my will, showing as though I am channeling the direction of my spiritual life from a internal conception, an illusion, into a manifest light-giving reality that I can share with others and hopefully give life to others. So I guess that would be my interpretation of the initial sign. As far as the structure of the card and the word of the card, oppression, I don't have anything right now. But we're going to end this. So, I hope you guys liked this enough to hopefully give me another chance on the next podcast. We'll start talking about specific topics, and we'll get into all that craziness. Until next time, guys, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will.